Sara Mitchell stood in front of the mirror in the crew lounge, adjusting her navy blazer and smoothing down her crisp, white blouse. The reflection staring back at her was that of a dedicated flight attendant, someone who had worked tirelessly to climb the ranks in her career. Her long, brown hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her makeup was perfectly applied, giving her an air of professionalism. But beneath that polished exterior, Sara felt a storm of anxiety brewing. "Okay, Sara, you got this," she murmured to herself, practicing the warm smile that was an essential part of her job. She had learned early on that first impressions mattered, especially in the world of air travel, where passengers could be as unpredictable as the weather. Just keep it together. Smile, serve, and keep the peace. As she made her way to the boarding gate, she could hear the muffled sounds of passengers checking in, families saying their goodbyes, and the low hum of excited chatter. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, the weight of her responsibilities settling on her shoulders. She scanned her crew's faces, noting the familiar camaraderie that had formed over countless flights. Mark, her fellow attendant, was already chatting with a group of passengers, his easygoing demeanor putting everyone at ease. Once aboard the aircraft, Sara began her pre-flight checks, ensuring that everything was in order. The cabin was spacious, and the aroma of fresh coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of polished leather. She glanced around, noting the arrangement of passengers. Some were engrossed in their devices, while others engaged in quiet conversations. As the boarding process continued, Sara's attention was drawn to an elderly woman in a faded floral dress who was fumbling with her boarding pass. Evelyn Carter, as Sara would soon learn, was the woman's name. She appeared lost in thought, her thin hair pulled back in a bun that seemed to be barely holding on. Her glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she squinted at the pass, searching for her seat number. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sara approached with her practiced smile. "Can I help you find your seat?" "Oh, dear," Evelyn replied, her voice quivering slightly. "I think I'm supposed to be in business class." "Let me check that for you," Sara said, her heart already racing. She flipped through the manifest, confirming the seating arrangements. "I'm sorry, but I see you're in coach. Unfortunately, we can't allow upgrades unless they're pre-approved." Evelyn's face fell, and for a moment, the warm atmosphere of the cabin seemed to chill. "But I really need to sit up there," she insisted, her tone tinged with desperation. "I'm traveling alone, and it's such a long flight." "I understand, ma'am," Sara replied, her voice firm but polite, "but I have to adhere to the airline policies. I can assist you with your luggage if you need." The tension in the air became palpable, and a few nearby passengers began to whisper, casting sidelong glances at the unfolding scene. "She looks like she could use a break," one young woman murmured to her companion, who nodded in agreement. "Please, just this once?" Evelyn's voice broke slightly, and Sara felt a pang of guilt tugging at her heart. Yet she stood her ground, feeling the weight of her position. "I'm really sorry, but I can't make exceptions." With a resigned sigh, Evelyn turned away, her shoulders slumping as she made her way to her seat in coach. Sara felt her resolve waver for a brief moment, watching the elderly woman settle into her seat, her expression a mix of disappointment and resignation. "Look, I promise you'll be okay. It's just a flight," Sara called after her, but it felt hollow, even to her own ears. She quickly turned her attention back to her duties, pouring herself into the routine of safety demonstrations and pre-flight announcements. As the plane taxied down the runway, Sara's mind drifted back to Evelyn. She caught glimpses of the woman from time to time, who now sat quietly, staring out the window. Sara could see the reflection of clouds passing by in the glass, and for a moment, she wondered what stories lay behind those tired eyes. The flight progressed, with Sara moving through the aisles, serving drinks and meals, but the earlier encounter lingered in her mind like an unwelcome guest. She overheard some passengers discussing the elderly woman, their whispers carrying a mix of curiosity and judgment. "Did you see her? She didn't even look like she belonged in coach," one of them said, laced with disdain. "She probably just wanted to flaunt her age," another replied, and Sara felt her stomach churn at their words. By the time the meal service was completed, Sara found herself back in the galley, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Mark entered, a knowing look on his face as he leaned against the countertop. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I had a bit of a run-in with a passenger," she admitted, glancing back toward the coach section. "An elderly woman. I denied her access to business class and now I feel terrible." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Evelyn Carter? I've heard of her. You might not know, but she's not just your average passenger." "What do you mean?" Sara asked, intrigued despite herself. "Let's just say there's more to her than meets the eye," Mark replied cryptically, a hint of respect in his voice. "You should probably think twice before judging her." Sara frowned, a sense of curiosity bubbling to the surface. "What do you mean by that?" Mark shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I can't say more. Just be aware. Not everyone is as they seem." With those parting words, he left her alone with her thoughts, stirring the coffee as she contemplated the layers of her own actions. A part of her wanted to dismiss Mark's comment, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Evelyn than she had initially perceived. As the flight continued on its journey, the cabin began to settle into a tranquil hum, with most passengers engrossed in their own worlds. Sara's guilt about Evelyn resurfaced, gnawing at her conscience. She knew she had followed the rules, but the rigidity of her actions felt increasingly wrong. When the announcement for the descent was made, Sara took a deep breath, pushing her thoughts aside. She would finish the flight and then perhaps find a way to make amends. After all, the world of air travel was one of fleeting moments, each encounter a brief intersection of lives. And sometimes those intersections held the power to change everything. As the flight continued its journey through the skies, the hum of the engines blended with the muted conversations of passengers settled into their seats. Sara Mitchell, a flight attendant who had always prided herself on her ability to maintain decorum in every situation, found herself distracted. Her mind drifted to the elderly woman, Evelyn Carter, whose deflated spirit had tugged at her conscience. Despite the aircraft's altitude, a storm brewed within Sara, fueled by snippets of overheard conversations that fluttered around her like startled birds. "Did you hear about that woman?" a passenger whispered to his companion. "The one who used to be someone?" "Yeah, they say she changed everything," the companion replied, eyes wide with intrigue. "I think she's the real deal, like she was there when it all went down." Sara's curiosity piqued. She glanced over at Evelyn, who sat quietly in her seat, seemingly oblivious to the whispers that surrounded her. Her white hair framed a wise face marked with the lines of time and experience. There was a certain dignity about her, one that belied the frailty of her years. What had she done that had left such an impression on these people? Was she truly someone of significance? The questions danced in Sara's mind, igniting a flicker of empathy that she had initially suppressed. "Excuse me, could I get a drink of water?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was a young man sitting 2 rows in front of Evelyn. Sara nodded, her instincts kicking in as she moved to fulfill the request. As she poured the water, she caught Mark, another flight attendant, chatting with Evelyn in the back of the cabin. His tone was different, respectful, even reverent. "Hey, Mark," she called out, a hint of trepidation in her voice. As he turned, she noticed the way Evelyn smiled at him, a warmth that seemed to transcend the years separating them. "What's going on back there?" "Oh, just a little chat," Mark replied, his eyes sparkling with something akin to admiration. "You wouldn't believe the stories she has." Sara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean? Is she someone important?" Mark glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening, before leaning closer. "Let's just say Evelyn is a part of history, Sara. You have no idea." "History?" she echoed, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" Mark hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of revealing more. "She was an activist back in the day, a real pioneer. You know how we learn about those who fought for change? Well, she was one of them." Sara tried to process this information, her heart pounding at the thought. This elderly woman whom she had denied access to business class had once been part of something monumental. Why is she traveling alone? "Maybe she's choosing to keep a low profile," Mark suggested. "Or maybe she's just tired of the spotlight. But trust me, she's not just some feeble old lady." As Mark walked away, Sara's thoughts spiraled. How had she been so quick to judge? She felt a deep-seated guilt creep in, gnawing at her as she returned to her duties. Throughout the flight, she couldn't help but steal glances at Evelyn, who sat serenely, flipping through a worn-out book, seemingly at peace with her surroundings. The flight progressed uneventfully until they began their descent. Suddenly, the cabin was filled with a series of gasps as the aircraft hit a patch of turbulence. Sara's heart raced, the adrenaline sharpening her focus. She moved swiftly down the aisle, reassuring passengers with comforting words, her mind still partially occupied with thoughts of Evelyn. "Everything's fine, folks. Just a little bumpy. Please remain seated and buckle your seatbelts," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. As she passed by Evelyn, the older woman looked up, her expression unflappable. "Don't worry, dear," Evelyn said, her voice calm and collected. "I've been through worse than this." Sara paused, momentarily taken aback. "You have?" "Oh yes, you wouldn't believe the things I've seen," Evelyn replied, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. "But I've also learned that fear often clouds our judgment. Just breathe." "Right," Sara managed, her own breath hitching slightly in her throat. There was something about Evelyn's words that resonated with her, a reminder of the strength that comes from facing life's storms. As the turbulence subsided and the plane steadied, Sara returned to her responsibilities, yet the conversation lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake off the feeling that there was a deeper connection between them, something that transcended their roles as attendant and passenger. Once the plane landed safely, the crew began the disembarking process, and Sara felt a sense of urgency to learn more about Evelyn. She watched as the elderly woman gathered her belongings, her movements deliberate yet graceful. Just as Sara was about to approach her again, a commotion erupted at the front of the cabin. "Did you see that?" a passenger exclaimed, pointing towards the cockpit area. "Something's not right." Sara's instincts kicked in once more, and she rushed towards the front. The chaos turned into a flurry of activity as the crew worked to manage the situation. It was in that moment that she realized Evelyn had slipped away, disappearing into the crowd of passengers. "Where did she go?" Sara called out to Mark as he emerged from the galley. "Who?" he replied, adjusting his tie, still looking a bit shaken. "Evelyn? I was just talking to her," Sara said, panic rising in her voice. Mark shrugged, scanning the area. "I saw her head towards the rear exit. Maybe she's just eager to get off the plane." "But I need to talk to her," Sara insisted, her heart pounding. "There's something about her. She's not just an ordinary passenger." "Let it go, Sara," Mark advised gently. "You'll have plenty of opportunities to speak with her. Just focus on what's happening here." Sara felt a twinge of frustration, but knew he was right. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind inside her. But as the passengers began to disembark, she caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette amidst the throng. Evelyn was speaking to an older man, their conversation imbued with an air of familiarity that sent a shiver down Sara's spine. "Who is that?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her again. Mark turned to look, his expression shifting from concern to acknowledgement. "That's probably someone from her past. I've seen them talking before. She's got a history, and it looks like it's catching up with her." Before Sara could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the bustling terminal. Evelyn, however, remained, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something, or someone. The moment their gazes locked, an unspoken recognition passed between them, and Sara felt a pang of connection that was impossible to ignore. "I need to know more," Sara whispered, determination flooding her senses. The mystery of Evelyn Carter was no longer just an idle curiosity. It had become a calling. As the last of the passengers exited the plane, Sara felt a pull towards Evelyn, drawn by the threads of fate that seemed to intertwine their lives. There was a story waiting to be uncovered, one that promised to bridge the gap between generations and reveal the complexities of the human experience. With each step towards Evelyn, Sara felt the weight of her own choices pressing down on her. The flight had been a simple transaction of service and policy, but now it had transformed into a quest for understanding. She had a chance to right a wrong, to connect with a woman who had not only witnessed history, but had perhaps played a role in shaping it. "Evelyn!" Sara called out, her voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. The elderly woman turned, her expression shifting from surprise to a soft smile that warmed Sara's heart. "Ah, there you are, dear," Evelyn replied, a twinkle of mischief in her eyes. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come after me." I need to know who you really are, Sara said, her breathless urgency evident. I want to understand your story. Evelyn paused, her gaze penetrating. Then let's find somewhere quieter, shall we? There's much to discuss, and I believe it's time you heard the truth. As they walked away from the bustling crowd, Sara felt a sense of hope blossom within her. This was just the beginning of a journey that would lead her down a path of discovery, weaving together the threads of their lives in ways she could never have imagined. Sara Mitchell sat in the flight crew lounge, the low hum of chatter and the aroma of coffee swirling around her like a comforting blanket. Yet her heart was heavy, weighed down by the encounter she had just had with Evelyn Carter. It was hard to shake off the feeling that she had missed something important. She glanced towards her friend Lisa, who was scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to Sara's turmoil. "Lisa," Sara began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what do you know about Evelyn Carter?" Lisa looked up, brow furrowing in confusion. "The old lady who tried to get into business class? What about her? Didn't you say she was just some sweet grandmother?" "No, I mean, there's something more to her. I overheard some passengers talking about her, and then Mark was all respectful to her. It's like she's not just an ordinary traveler." Lisa rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her coffee. "Sara, we've got a job to do. It's not worth stressing over some stranger's story. Let it go. You can't save everyone. But what if she's someone important? What if—" Sara's voice broke off as she felt a swell of emotion rise within her. It was frustrating to feel so captivated by Evelyn, a woman she had only interacted with for a few brief moments. Lisa's nonchalance only fueled her determination. "I'm going to find out who she is," Sara declared, her voice firm. The thought of letting this go, of not uncovering the mystery that had enraptured her, felt like a betrayal. With a resolute nod, she pulled out her phone, her fingers dancing over the screen as she began her search. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating her face in the dim light of the lounge. She typed in Evelyn Carter's name, her heart racing with anticipation. Fragmented articles began to appear, each one revealing a bit more about the woman she had dismissed so quickly. There were headlines about her involvement in the civil rights movement, her speeches that had inspired thousands, and her tireless advocacy for social justice. Sara's breath caught in her throat as she read about a rally from the 1960s where Evelyn had stood on a platform, a beacon of hope for those fighting against oppression. "Oh my God," Sara breathed, her heart pounding. "She was a prominent activist." "Who was?" Lisa asked, her interest piqued as she leaned closer to Sara's screen. "Evelyn Carter," Sara exclaimed, barely able to contain her excitement. "She was a part of history. Look at this. She led protests, gave speeches. She changed lives." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, the old woman on our flight? No way. She looks like she could barely walk." "That's the thing," Sara insisted, her fingers scrolling through more articles. "She's lived a lifetime. She's seen things we can't even imagine." As Sara continued her research, her admiration for Evelyn grew alongside her guilt. She felt a sharp pang in her chest, realizing that she had judged a woman based solely on her appearance and her adherence to policy. It felt wrong. "Are you going to confront her?" Lisa asked, her tone shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "I have to," Sara replied, her voice steady. "I need to apologize, and I want to hear her story. I'm drawn to it, Lisa." The conversation drifted into silence, and Sara's mind raced with images of Evelyn, the elderly woman's kind eyes, the way she had held herself with dignity despite the rejection. There was a connection there, a thread that echoed through time, linking them in ways Sara had yet to understand. On the next flight, Sara felt a blend of anticipation and nervousness. She knew she had to confront Evelyn, to seek understanding and perhaps forgiveness for her earlier actions. As she moved through the cabin, she caught sight of Evelyn seated in her usual spot in coach. The woman looked serene, gazing out the window at the clouds drifting by. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter?" Sara approached hesitantly, her heart racing. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Evelyn turned, her expression softening as she recognized Sara. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" Sara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you on the last flight. I was strict about the policies, and I didn't take the time to consider who you really are." Evelyn smiled gently, her eyes sparkling with warmth. You were just doing your job, Sara. I understand. These policies can be necessary, but they can also blind us to the humanity of each other, can't they? Sara nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. I've learned a bit about you since then. You've done incredible things, Evelyn. I had no idea. Ah, the past is a complex tapestry, Evelyn said, her voice rich with experience. I was young once, full of fire and purpose. But life has a way of changing our paths. What matters is not where we've been, but where we choose to go. Sara felt a stirring of inspiration at Evelyn's words. I'd love to hear more about your journey, if you're comfortable sharing, that is. Evelyn chuckled softly. Comfortable is a relative term, my dear. But if you're willing to listen, I'm more than willing to share. There are stories buried deep, stories that shaped who I am. As the plane cruised through the sky, Sara felt herself leaning in closer, eager to absorb every word. Evelyn began to recount her experiences in the civil rights movement, her voice a melodic blend of nostalgia and sorrow. I remember the rallies, Evelyn began, her eyes glistening with the memories of her youth. The energy was electric. We were fighting for something bigger than ourselves. We were young, passionate, and sometimes foolish, but we believed in change. Sara listened intently, captivated by the strength in Evelyn's voice. It was a reminder of the resilience that resided within every person, a story of courage that transcended time and age. And then there were moments of despair, Evelyn continued, her gaze turning distant. Losses that made me question everything. But through it all, I learned the importance of hope. Hope for a better tomorrow, for a world that embraces love over fear. A silence enveloped them, thick with understanding. Sara felt a deep connection forming, one that transcended the confines of the airplane cabin. Evelyn was more than just an elderly woman. She was a living testament to the struggle for justice and equality. I wish I had known this before, Sara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel ashamed of how I treated you. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on Sara's. Don't dwell on it, dear. We all have our moments of weakness. What matters is that you recognize it now. You can choose to be better, to learn from the past. As they continued their conversation, Sara felt a renewed sense of purpose within herself. She realized that Evelyn's story was a reminder of her own struggles, her desire to rise above the challenges life threw her way. With every passing moment, the distance between them shrank, and Sara felt like she was conversing with a kindred spirit. The flight continued, the hum of engines blending with the rhythm of their dialogue, and Sara knew that this encounter with Evelyn would change her life forever. As they spoke, the clouds outside shifted, reflecting the light of a setting sun, casting a warm glow inside the cabin. In that moment, Sara understood that she was no longer just a flight attendant doing her job. She was part of a larger narrative, a narrative rich with history, struggle, and an undeniable connection that would guide her forward. On the next flight, Sara Mitchell felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as she prepared to approach Evelyn Carter. The woman had been a constant presence in her thoughts since their last encounter, a figure shrouded in mystery and intrigue. As she maneuvered through the crowded aisle of the aircraft, she could see Evelyn sitting quietly in her coach seat, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos around them. Evelyn looked up as Sara approached, her eyes brightening with recognition. Ah, the flight attendant with the warm smile, she greeted, her voice carrying a gentle cadence that immediately put Sara at ease. Hi, Evelyn, Sara said, her voice slightly trembling. I wanted to talk to you about, well, what happened last time. I owe you an apology. Evelyn regarded her thoughtfully, her expression softening. Honey, there's no need for that. Policies are policies, aren't they? But I appreciate your kindness. She motioned for Sara to sit beside her, a gesture that surprised Sara, but also invited conversation. Thank you, Sara said, settling into the seat. I guess I just didn't realize who you were. I've been hearing bits and pieces about you from other passengers and crew members. It seems like your past is quite extraordinary. Evelyn chuckled softly, her laughter like the tinkling of wind chimes. Extraordinary? I suppose that's one way to put it. Life has a way of weaving its own stories, doesn't it? Sometimes those stories are filled with more tragedy than triumph. Sara was captivated, her curiosity piqued. Would you mind sharing some of those stories with me? I've been thinking about you a lot since our last flight. Evelyn took a moment to collect her thoughts, a wistful look crossing her face. Well, there was a time in the 1960s when I was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. It was a tumultuous period, filled with passion and purpose. We believed we could change the world, one protest at a time. Sara leaned in closer, enraptured by Evelyn's narrative. What was it like? I can't even imagine being part of something so important. It was exhilarating, yet terrifying, Evelyn recalled, her eyes sparkling with memories. We marched for justice, for equality, and against oppression. I remember one particular march in Washington, D.C. It felt like the weight of the world rested on our shoulders as we stood together, chanting for our rights. I met so many brave souls there, individuals who became lifelong friends. What happened to them? Sara asked, her heart racing with curiosity and empathy. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window, her smile fading slightly. Some are still fighting the good fight, while others have fallen victim to the very injustices we sought to dismantle. It's a bittersweet reality, but in those moments, we felt invincible. Sara absorbed every word, feeling a sense of admiration swell within her. You must have been so brave. I can't imagine standing up for what you believed in like that. I struggle to find my own voice sometimes. Evelyn turned to her, a knowing look in her eyes. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, dear. It's the decision to act despite it. You have your own battles to fight, don't you? Sara hesitated, contemplating the weight of her own struggles, her demanding job, her relentless pursuit of perfection, and the gnawing sense of inadequacy that often accompanied her. I do. I guess I just feel lost sometimes. Like I'm trapped in this routine, and I'm not really making a difference. Evelyn reached out, placing a comforting hand on Sara's arm. Every small act of kindness, every moment of understanding, contributes to the greater good. You're already making a difference, Sara. Don't underestimate the impact you can have on someone's life, even if it seems small. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and Sara felt as though she had known Evelyn forever. They spoke of dreams, regrets, and the passage of time, a tapestry of shared experiences that transcended generations. Just as Sara felt an unbreakable bond forming, an announcement crackled over the intercom, shattering the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The cabin began to shake slightly as the plane hit pockets of air, and Sara's heart raced. Evelyn, Stay calm, dear. Just breathe, Evelyn advised, her voice steady. Sara nodded, though her mind raced with worry. She quickly stood up, ensuring the other passengers were securing their seatbelts. Please remain seated, everyone. We'll get through this. As she moved through the aisles, she could feel the anxiety mounting among the passengers. Some whispered nervously to each other, while others gripped their armrests tightly. Yet, amidst the chaos, Sara's thoughts were anchored on Evelyn. The elderly woman's calm demeanor in the face of turbulence inspired her to maintain her own composure. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came through the intercom. We're experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be through this shortly. Sara returned to Evelyn's side, her heart pounding as the turbulence intensified. The plane shook more violently, and the anxiety in the cabin escalated. She could see passengers exchanging worried glances, and the atmosphere grew tense. Evelyn, are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her voice. I'm fine, dear. Just a little bump in the road, Evelyn replied, her eyes twinkling with an odd light. But I must say, this reminds me of the protests we used to organize. There were times we faced much worse than a little turbulence. Sara chuckled nervously, her heart still racing. I don't think I could handle that kind of turbulence. You're so brave. Bravery is a choice, remember? Evelyn reminded her gently. And sometimes we find our strength in the most unexpected situations. As the plane shook, a sudden jolt caused several passengers to gasp. The overhead compartments rattled, and Sara instinctively reached for Evelyn's hand, seeking comfort amidst the chaos. We'll get through this together, she assured, her grip firm. Evelyn smiled, squeezing Sara's hand in return. That's the spirit, my dear. Just remember, every storm has an end, and often we emerge stronger on the other side. As the turbulence continued, Sara felt a sense of solidarity with Evelyn, a bond forged in the face of uncertainty. They exchanged reassuring glances, and for a moment, the fear that gripped the cabin lessened. Sara realized that the elderly woman's presence was a source of strength, reminding her of the resilience they both possessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the turbulence began to subside. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin once more. "Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're through the worst of it. Please feel free to unfasten your seatbelts." Sara released her breath, relief washing over her. She turned to Evelyn, who wore an enigmatic smile. "See? We made it through." "Yes, we did," Sara replied, her heart still racing but filled with gratitude. "Thank you for being here, Evelyn. You're truly remarkable." Evelyn waved off the compliment, her eyes twinkling. "Just an old woman with a few stories to tell. But remember, Sara, the most remarkable people are often those who dare to listen and learn." As they settled back into their seats, the conversation lingered in the air, an unspoken understanding binding them together. Sara felt a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by Evelyn's strength and wisdom. She realized that the turbulence they had just faced was not just a metaphor for the flight, but for life itself, a reminder that even in the face of chaos, there was always a chance to connect, to learn, and to grow. The flight continued, and as Sara looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, she felt a sense of hope blossoming within her. She would continue to seek out Evelyn's stories, to unravel the mysteries of the past, and perhaps, in doing so, she would find her own voice amidst the noise of everyday life. Sara's heart raced as she navigated the narrow aisles of the airplane, her mind swirling with concern for Evelyn. The turbulence had rattled everyone, but now the absence of the elderly woman felt like a gaping hole in her chest. She reached the front of the cabin and asked a fellow flight attendant, "Have you seen Evelyn, the woman who was sitting in coach?" The attendant's brow furrowed in thought. "No, I haven't. I thought she was still in her seat. Why? Is something wrong?" Sara shook her head, anxiety tightening her throat. "I just spoke with her, and now she's gone. I need to find her." "Okay, I'll help you look," the attendant replied. They split up, searching through the rows of seats, calling out Evelyn's name quietly, trying not to disturb the passengers who were finally settling after the bumpy ride. As Sara walked past the cramped rows, she noticed the passengers. Relieved faces, their chatter returning to normal. But her mind was elsewhere, racing with thoughts of Evelyn. What if she had needed help? What if she was in trouble? After several minutes of searching, Sara decided to check the galley in the back, where flight attendants often gathered between services. As she approached, she heard hushed voices. She paused, her heart pounding, and leaned closer to the door to listen. "Evelyn, it's been years," a deep voice said, one that sounded both familiar and foreign to her. "I know, Thomas," Evelyn replied, her tone filled with nostalgia and warmth. "I never thought I'd see you again." Sara's curiosity piqued. She pushed the door open slightly, just enough to peek inside. There, in the dim light of the galley, stood Evelyn with an older man, his silver hair catching the light. His face was etched with lines of age, but his eyes held a spark of recognition and emotion that sent a jolt through Sara's chest. "Excuse me," Sara interrupted, stepping fully into the galley, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Evelyn, I was looking for you. I was worried." Evelyn turned to her, her expression shifting from surprise to reassurance. "Oh dear, I'm fine, really. I just wanted a moment to speak with an old friend." "Old friend?" Sara echoed, glancing at the man. "I didn't know you had company back here." The man smiled gently, his eyes twinkling. "I'm Thomas. We had quite the journey together many years ago, didn't we, Evelyn?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with memories. "We did. We fought for what we believed in, didn't we? It seems like another lifetime." "Fought?" Sara interjected, unable to contain her curiosity. "What do you mean?" Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn raised a hand, her expression becoming serious. "Sara, it's a long story, one that I'm not sure I'm ready to share just yet." Sara felt a pang of disappointment, but understood the gravity of the moment. After what I learned about you, I thought we could connect. You mean so much to so many." Evelyn's gaze softened. "You are kind, my dear. But there are parts of my past that are not easy to discuss." "Not yet." Before Sara could respond, the intercom crackled to life, pulling their attention. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will keep you updated." An uncomfortable tension settled in the air. Thomas glanced at Evelyn, and Sara felt the need to break the silence. "Evelyn, is there something I need to know? Something about your past that could affect us?" Evelyn looked at her, and for a moment, Sara thought she saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "It's complicated, dear, but I promise you, I will explain everything soon." Just then, the door to the galley swung open, and a fellow crew member rushed in, her face pale. "Sara, we need you in the front. There's been a situation in the cabin." Sara's stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" "Just come. It's urgent." Sara turned to Evelyn, who nodded, her expression resolute. "Go, dear. I'll be right here when you return." Sara hesitated, torn between her duty and her desire to stay with Evelyn. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. We have a lot to discuss, and I'll be waiting." With a deep breath, Sara nodded and rushed out of the galley, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. She made her way to the front, where the crew was attempting to calm the passengers, whose anxiety was palpable. "What's happening?" Sara asked, joining her fellow attendants. "The captain says we may need to make an emergency landing," one of her colleagues replied, her voice low but urgent. "There's been a potential mechanical issue, and we don't want to cause a panic." Sara swallowed hard, her mind racing back to Evelyn and the mysterious man. What if this emergency landing was somehow connected to them? She felt a sudden surge of determination. "We need to keep everyone calm. Let's reassure them it's just a precaution." The flight attendants nodded, and together they spread out through the cabin, soothing worried passengers. As Sara walked down the aisle, she caught glimpses of fear etched on their faces. She smiled brightly, speaking softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue, but our crew is trained for these situations. Please remain seated and we'll keep you informed." As she reassured the passengers, she couldn't shake the feeling of urgency regarding Evelyn. She returned to the galley as soon as she could, only to find it empty. Evelyn was gone. Panic gripped Sara again. Where could she have gone? She searched the cabin once more, calling out Evelyn's name softly. Her heart sank as she reached the front and saw the cockpit door ajar. The captain was on the radio, his expression focused. "Excuse me, Captain," Sara said, her voice slightly trembling. "Have you seen Evelyn, the elderly woman?" "I can't find her." The captain turned to her, his brow furrowed. "I haven't seen her since the turbulence. Is she okay?" "She was talking to an old friend in the galley," Sara replied, her anxiety rising. "I just want to make sure she's safe." "Let me know if you need help searching," he said, his tone reassuring. "We're going to be okay. Just focus on keeping the passengers calm." Sara nodded, her resolve strengthening. She would find Evelyn. She had to. As she turned to head back into the cabin, a wave of determination swept over her. Evelyn was more than just an elderly woman. She carried stories, secrets, and a history that intertwined with Sara's own life in ways she had yet to understand. As she walked through the aisles again, she felt a sense of purpose. She would protect Evelyn, and in doing so, perhaps she would uncover the truth that had eluded her for so long. Sara's heart raced as the cockpit announced the need for an emergency landing. The cabin erupted into a mixture of chaos and confusion. Flight attendants rushed to their stations, securing loose items while reassuring passengers. Among them, Sara felt a weight on her shoulders. Not just from the urgency of the situation, but from the presence of Evelyn Carter beside her. "Stay calm, everyone," she called out, her voice steady despite the turbulence of emotions within her. "We're going to land safely. Please follow the instructions of the crew." Her eyes met Evelyn's, and for a fleeting moment, she felt an unspoken bond form between them, woven together by the threads of shared experience and understanding. Evelyn, with her silver hair and wise, knowing eyes, stood beside Sara, exuding an aura of calm that somehow soothed the passengers. "You've got this, dear," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's arm. "Just remember to breathe." Sara nodded, grateful for the unexpected support from the elderly woman. "Thank you, Evelyn. She hesitated, glancing at the passengers, who were now whispering nervously amongst themselves. "I never thought I'd be here doing this. It's just a lot." "It is," Evelyn agreed, her voice steady as she glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "But sometimes, it's in the moments of crisis that we find our true strength." As the plane shook violently, Sara felt a rush of adrenaline. She focused on the passengers, checking on those who appeared particularly anxious. "Sir, can I get you anything?" she asked a man gripping his armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'm fine," he replied, though his voice trembled. "Just remember to breathe," she echoed Evelyn's earlier words, offering him a small smile. Evelyn turned to Sara, her expression serious. "This is the moment I've been waiting for, dear," she said quietly, her eyes glistening with a mixture of fear and resolve. "It's time to share my truth." Sara's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Before we land, I need you to understand something important," Evelyn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a connection between us, something that ties our families together in ways you can't yet fathom." Sara's mind raced. "What do you mean? How can that be?" Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself against the turbulence. "My life has been more intertwined with your family's history than you know. There's a secret I've kept for decades, one that I couldn't reveal until now." As the plane descended, the cabin filled with the sound of engines roaring, drowning out their conversation. Sara leaned in closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it? Please, tell me." Evelyn hesitated, her eyes searching Sara's face. "You need to know that your grandmother, Margaret, was a pivotal figure in my life during the civil rights movement. We fought side by side, and there's something about her that you've inherited." "Margaret? My grandmother?" Sara felt a whirlwind of emotions. "What does that have to do with you?" "Everything," Evelyn said, her voice a mixture of urgency and vulnerability. "Your grandmother made sacrifices for our cause, but she also carried a burden, a secret that has lingered through the years." Sara's mind swirled with questions. What kind of secret? Before Evelyn could respond, the aircraft jolted violently, and the cabin lights flickered. Passengers gasped, gripping their armrests in fear. "Sara!" Evelyn shouted above the din. "We need to focus on the landing right now. I promise I'll explain everything once we're safe." Sara nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Okay, let's get through this." As they braced for landing, the plane touched down with a jarring thud, followed by a chorus of relieved sighs and murmurs from the passengers. Once the plane came to a halt, Sara felt a rush of relief mixed with an overwhelming need to hear more from Evelyn. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off," the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. As the passengers slowly unbuckled their seatbelts, Sara turned to Evelyn, whose face was now pale but determined. "Evelyn, we need to talk," she said, urgency lacing her tone. "Yes, we do," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But first, we have to get off this plane." When they finally disembarked, the atmosphere outside the aircraft was thick with anticipation. Journalists and cameras flashed as they approached the terminal, eager to capture the stories of the passengers who had just endured a harrowing experience. Sara's heart raced as she spotted the media frenzy. "Evelyn, we should get away from the cameras," she urged, scanning the crowd for a way to escape the attention. But Evelyn's expression shifted from anxiety to resolve. "No, this is my moment." "What do you mean?" "I've been waiting for decades to share my story. It's time the world knows the truth about my life, your grandmother, and the legacy we share," she declared, stepping forward into the spotlight. Sara felt a mix of pride and fear as Evelyn began to speak to the reporters, her voice strong and unwavering. "I am Evelyn Carter, and I have a story that needs to be told." As Evelyn recounted her experiences during the civil rights movement, Sara felt a swell of emotion. This was the woman who had once been a beacon of hope and strength, and now she was sharing her truth with the world. "Evelyn, wait," Sara interjected, her voice rising above the crowd. "What about the secret you mentioned?" Evelyn turned, her eyes locking onto Sara's. I'll tell you everything, I promise. But first, I need to ensure the world hears what I have to say. As the reporters pressed for more information, Evelyn turned back to the cameras. This isn't just my story. It's a story that connects us all. It's about love, sacrifice, and the fight for justice. And it's a story that involves the Mitchell family. Sara felt her breath hitch in her throat. The weight of Evelyn's words pressed heavily upon her, intertwining their fates in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Clutching the photograph Evelyn had given her earlier, she gazed at the image of a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to herself. "This photograph," Sara whispered, looking down at it. "Who is she?" Evelyn's face softened, and she took a deep breath. "She's a part of your past, Sara, and together, we'll uncover the truth behind our families' intertwined histories." As the cameras continued to click and the crowd buzzed with excitement, Sara felt a sense of dawning clarity. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was no longer alone. With Evelyn by her side, she was determined to unravel the mystery that connected their lives, one thread at a time. The truth hung in the air, electric and palpable, as they stood together in the spotlight. Two women from different generations, bound by shared histories and secrets yet to be uncovered.